The message I have this morning is called "The One Who Can Meet Your Need," and I want to open up with prayer here, and we're gonna get into these scriptures here. Jesus, I just want to express publicly my debt of gratitude I have to you, Lord, for what you've done in my life, Lord. I know there's so many others in this room. That's their testimony, God, that you came to them many years ago, for some many years more than me, Lord, and you came to them and you revealed yourself in a way that transformed their lives, God, that brought them out of the broad way and into the narrow way, Lord, and that they're serving and they're trying to follow as closely as possible, Lord, even in our frailty, even in our weakness, Lord. That's what we desire. You truly have changed our desires, God. And God, there's others in this place, Lord, who that's not their testimony. They're not there yet, but there's something in their hearts, as Pastor Steve talked about. There's something there, God, that you felt that it was worth bringing them into this place, God, and maybe upsetting their life and whatever it took to get them here, Lord. Maybe going through some battles and obstacles, but you saw something to bring them here. And God, your desire for every person in this room is to follow on that narrow way, Lord. The ways of the Lord are available to every one of us, God. You don't make mistakes and you don't play games. You don't waste time, Lord. You've got an intentional plan and you're pursuing every person, I believe, in this room, even online, Lord. You're pursuing us, each one of us, God. And Father, I pray that we would just lift up our hands and surrender, Lord, and let you do the work that you're wanting to do in each one of us, God. And God, my prayer as we get into this message, Lord, as it's already been prayed this morning, Lord, we just want to see Jesus this morning, Lord. If that's the only thing you do, give us a fresh glimpse of who you are, the character that you have, and that we could respond in a way that's appropriate to what you're asking us to do, Father. I pray that you would give us that grace this morning. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 7. Obviously, you already know that. We've been reading through it. And I'm really grateful for the Gospels. I was thinking about while I was preparing, you learn a lot about somebody by the way that they act in different situations. Some people say, well, they can say something about themselves, well, I'm this way, I'm that way, but you really see what's really in someone's heart and their life when they're walking through something and you see how they react. And we get that incredible blessing to see what Jesus was like on the earth through the Gospels. It's the closest thing maybe to video footage that we have of Jesus, of what would it be like. Because if we didn't have those stories, we would just be left to kind of guess, like, I wonder what he would do in this situation. I wonder what he would do if this happened. But we actually have a whole bunch of accounts of things that Jesus did. And as we read through the Gospels, what we're doing, we're being taught what Jesus is really like. It's not just what he was like 2,000 years ago. It's what he's like now, because Hebrews says that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the same Jesus that was in the Bible and the gospel stories, he's still the same. And not only that, but we learn about God the Father because Colossians tells us Jesus is the image of the invisible God, that he is God on earth. And so we can learn about the character of God and what he wants to do in our lives through these stories. And so today we have two simple but powerful stories that take place. In the context, Jesus has just finished giving some teachings that are similar to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. And now there's two events that take place we're going to look at today. And I want to read each of these stories, make some commentary, and then at the end I want to share three things that we can learn about Jesus through these stories. So if you pick up with me in Luke 7, verse 1. It says, "When Jesus concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and he has built us a synagogue." So let's stop there for a moment. So Jesus is being approached not by the man but he's being, it's like this entourage is going before him. These elders the Jewish elders of this city, they're coming toward Jesus to approach him with a request on behalf of a man. And this man was a Gentile. He was Obviously he worked for the Romans. We'll talk about that. But there was a lot of social things going on between the Jews and the Gentiles at the time. And, there were certain limits where they were only willing to fellowship and associate with Gentile people so much. And so there was a lot of kind of pressure there about Jews and Gentiles. But even more so, Jesus explicitly states during his ministry he was called to the Jewish people. He says that to the Canaanite woman who's asking for him to heal her demon-possessed daughter in Matthew 15. Jesus' response to her is, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of Israel. And so that was his primary focus. When he sends out the 12 in Matthew 10, he tells them, don't go the way of the Gentiles and don't go into Samaria, but focus on the lost sheep of Israel. And so this Gentile man who he wasn't Jewish, he didn't have that relationship, had some things going, he has some obstacles to overcome because he's approaching this Jewish rabbi and probably could have easily been talked out of it. Maybe especially these Jewish people might have said, well, you can't approach this Jesus. Don't waste your time with him. He's not going to help you. But even worse than that, he's a centurion. He's working for the Romans. And so he's one of the commanders in the army, working for the nation that is occupying Israel, so an enemy of Israel. Many of the Israelites did not, view very kindly to the Romans, and so this man worked for Caesar. He was one of the warriors there, overseeing his charge. And so for him to approach a Jewish rabbi and ask for anything from him shows he's probably pretty desperate, and he's willing kind of just to give it all because his circumstances could have talked him out of it. People around him could have talked him out of it, and yet he still sends these men to go ask for this miracle. But there are a couple of things about the centurion, I think, that are noteworthy that kind of tell us a little bit about his heart. For one thing, just the fact that he cares about his servant is pretty notable. Because if you study under Roman law at that time, if a slave got sick and wasn't able to work, it wasn't only allowed for a Roman to kill him or her, but it was actually expected. Like if they're not worth anything to you anymore, you would just kill your slave and you wouldn't even deal with it. And here's this man, instead of disposing of this slave and pushing him away or putting him to death, he's interceding on his behalf. He's trying to see a miracle take place for him. The other thing that is obvious from the story is that he had a great concern for the people of Israel, and he was supportive of their worship of God. That's why these elders are willing to come on his behalf. They're advocating for him because he had favor with the Jewish community, and he had helped them construct a synagogue. And so these elders actually have a testimony about this man. He really loves our nation, and they say, he's deserving of you doing this. You should do this for him. And so they come pleading on his behalf. And I love this story because a lot of times in the Gospels, people that come to Jesus are coming for their own needs. They're sick, they're whatever. They're coming for themselves. They have a legitimate need, and they're going to Jesus. But here's this group of people who are not only, these Jewish people are not, they're advocating for the centurion, but they're actually advocating for his servant. And so there's like this 3-layer out deal where they're coming. It's so important for these people that they're going to go and become an advocate for the centurion. And I think it's notable. It shows you what kind of man this person was. And I think if you picture the scene, you've got the disciples, you've got the crowds around Jesus that are watching him. He's doing miracles and teaching and all this. I imagine when these elders came up to him, for one thing, they felt they had to put a little pressure. They were like giving an advertising campaign, like, here, Jesus, here's the reason why you should do all this. They're trying to make sure that he understands what kind of man this was. But probably the people sitting around him are wondering, what's Jesus really going to do? Is he going to go to this Gentile's house? Is he going to go to a Roman centurion and he's going to do something for this man? Like, they were probably all poised wondering. And verse 6 says it very plainly that Jesus went with them. Jesus agrees, to go to this man's house, and he heads in that direction because the man has a need and he's inviting Jesus to come, and Jesus goes where there's need. That's what he does. That's what he's always done. He didn't get irritated and say, listen, I just got done teaching and I've got all these crowds to deal with. Like, I don't have time for that. He didn't say, well, no, he works for the Romans. There's no way I'm going there. Or he's a Gentile. He didn't give excuses or anything. It just says he went. He just said, okay, if this man needs help, then I'm going to go. And that's what Jesus does. He goes where there's need and where he's invited. I was thinking about this campus. We people who come here, the testimony is always the presence of God is there. That's why I tell people, you need to go check out campus. There's just something significant. And the reason God is here, obviously, is because he's been invited to be here, because there's been an atmosphere set, because people are praying, because there's worship. But what is he doing while he's here? He's meeting people's needs. That's what he does. He's here in this room right now. He's here to meet your need. If you would invite him and allow him to do that, that's what he's here for. That's who he is. That's what he does. And what's so interesting about this story is while Jesus is doing whatever he was doing at the time, and now he's changed his course, and now he's going to go to the centurion's house. But the centurion has this internal conversation. It's like the wheels start turning. And he's thinking to himself, he knows that Jesus is a Jewish prophet. He knows he's a holy man. Obviously, he believes Jesus has the power to heal his servant, or he wouldn't have even bothered wasting his time. But he also is aware of his own sinful condition. And he starts thinking about, well, if Jesus comes here, this is a holy man. I can't have him in my house. I can't have this person around me, And he starts having this kind of internal conversation, and he decides he's going to send another group of people to try to talk to Jesus. And it happens in verse 6. It continues on. It says this. This is the message they give to Jesus. It says, when Jesus was already not far from his house, the centurion sent friends to him saying this, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore, I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed, for I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. The centurion has such a humble estimation of himself. He sees himself as so unworthy. He starts coming up with a plan of how can he get the miracle without having Jesus come into his house. That's what's happening. He's trying to work a system because he realizes that Jesus coming, it's just this uncomfortable feeling. He's like, I'm not worthy of this man to come, but I still want to see my servant healed. And it's so contrasting the attitude you might think of a Roman centurion. You would think, probably most of the Hollywood depictions of, Jesus stories or whatever are probably pretty accurate. They were a bloodthirsty culture. They were barbaric. Probably in the military, they were very hard-hearted and proud and arrogant. You would think that would be kind of the attitude of this person. That's how you moved up the ranks, is by, killing and being successful in military. But this man, he has a completely different heart. He has a very humble heart. He reminds me of the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. Jesus says the tax collector, he won't even look up to heaven, but he just said, I'm so unworthy. He's beating his breast. That's the kind of attitude this Roman centurion had. He's like, I can't have Jesus come. I'm not worthy of him to come to me. Not only did he say he's not worthy to have Jesus come, he said, I didn't even feel worthy to come to you myself. And so he's sending other people to Jesus. And because of his humility, he comes up with this plan to see Jesus heal his servant without him coming, and it's just it's so crazy, you would think the centurion would think, well, I'm worthy of Jesus coming, come on, you better come and you better do what I need, and he's actually working against that, and he's trying to keep Jesus away from him. I was thinking about the story in Kings about Naaman. If you remember, he was also a commander of an enemy nation of Israel, and Elisha the prophet is there, and Naaman contracts leprosy, and someone tells him, go see the prophet of Israel. And so he goes in all this pomp and circumstance and makes this big scene, and Elisha doesn't even come out of his house, but he sends his servant, tells him to go wash in the river 7 times, and Naaman gets angry about it. I mean, he is hot because he's like, this, does he not know who I am? And does he not, he can't even at least come out and do some kind of ceremony? He's upset the prophet wouldn't come to him. And this centurion is trying to keep the prophet away from him. It's the complete opposite attitude. It's a complete attitude of humility. And he in this thinking of trying to figure this all out, he comes up with this thought that obviously came from the Lord about authority. Because he was in the chain of command of the Roman military. The centurion was not the highest. There was different levels of centurion, junior and senior, but then there's also the prefect and the legate above him and all the way up to Caesar. And so there's this chain of authority, and whatever the authority tells you to do, you did it unquestioningly. And when the command came down, you pushed it all the way down to the troops, and no one questioned it. They just did what they were told. And somehow, in this spiritual realm, he looks into the ministry of Jesus, and he says, well, whatever happens, whatever command comes from above, he's able to give the command. It's just going to happen. It's really incredible, epiphany. It's even hard for me to wrap my mind around. I've read this story for years, but it's hard for me to understand how he came to that conclusion. But it says it also amazed Jesus in verse 9. It says, when Jesus heard these things, that he marveled at him, and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well who had been sick. That phrase that said that Jesus was marveled or amazed, I only found two instances where that happens. One of them we talked about a few weeks ago was when Jesus was at his hometown Nazareth and they rejected him. It says that Jesus marveled at their lack of faith. And here it says the opposite. Jesus is marveled at the presence of faith. And in this case, it's from a Gentile Roman centurion, an unlikely source of somebody. And it's kind of shameful for the people of God there. He's like, I've not even found such great faith in God's own people who know better, who know how God works and knows all those things. He says this centurion has tapped into something. And I think that what we see here is a principle that he had such a lowly heart. He had such a humble heart. When you're lower to the ground, when your heart is bowed down low to the ground, you have a better view of God and the kingdom of God. The lower that you place yourself, the more that you can see the things of God. And this man was he was so humble and so low, he was able to see something that even the people of God weren't able to see. And the opposite's true. When you're full of pride and you're full of self, your view of God is tainted and you can't see spiritual things. You think you can because pride deceives you, but your eyes can't see except for when you're low to the ground. And Jesus was not only impressed by this man's faith, but he actually goes along with the plan and does what he suggested, which I think is just so interesting, just the lowliness of Jesus, that this centurion sends these people, well, don't even come, just speak the word. I know about authority. You don't have to come to my house. And Jesus says, okay, let's do it, and we'll do it that way. And he does it. Jesus just goes along with the plan, and he fulfills, he speaks the word, and they go back and they find the servant healed. And it's just such an interesting story of all this contrast in the culture and just the characters of this man. But we see in this story, it's not just the power and the authority of Jesus that we see, but also the desperation and the humility and faith of the centurion that does something to Jesus. It tugs on his heart, and this man gets his need met from Jesus. After that, Luke goes into the story right immediately the next day in verse 11 and talks about this widow. It says, it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. He came near to the gate of the city. Behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. In my years of ministry, I've preached quite a few funerals, and I can tell you that all funerals are difficult because there's loss, there's emotion, it's grief, there's all this stuff, regret, there's just a lot. And walking people through it, they're almost numb going through the process because they just lost this loved one and now they got to make all these plans. There's just all this stuff going on. But the hardest funerals, well, for one thing, if they're a believer, it's easier. But the hardest funerals are obviously those who don't believe, but especially when somebody younger passes away. Because when someone's in their 90s and they've lived a good life and they die of what we would say natural causes, and that it's still painful, it's still difficult, but at least it's like understandable. We all kind of expect that we're going to live a long life, we're going to pass away. It's just the way of life. But when their life gets cut short, it brings a whole other dimension of questions. God, why did this happen? Why didn't they live out? They had all this potential. There's all this stuff that goes on, and it just makes for a difficult, even more difficult scenario. And this widow, she's unnamed in the scriptures. We aren't told very much about her, but she's most likely poor because she was a widow, and so her husband wasn't there to support her. There wasn't a social security system, no retirement plans, all those types of things. Widows typically were poor and sometimes would become beggars in society. And this boy not only was her only son, which obviously was the most important thing, but his living and working was actually going to be her means of survival. That's how she would have been taken care of in those days, to have a son. And so she's sitting here going through all these emotions, and all this stuff is happening, and she's already lost a husband. We don't know how old she was. We don't know how old the husband was when he passed away. And here her only boy has passed, and she's, I'm sure, walking through the grief, maybe the denial of the thing happening, and they had to prepare this funeral, they had to get the coffin built and all this stuff, and now they're carrying her son out, and she's having to try to come to grips in that moment of saying her final goodbyes. That's kind of like when you go, you do the graveside service, and everyone just kind of has their final moment of release of saying goodbye to this. That's where she's at. And it says there's a large crowd following her. We don't know who they were, family, friends, or probably some were hired mourners and musicians and things, but there's this procession going. And while she's walking through the city in her grief and her sorrow, Jesus is entering the city, and he's got his own large crowd. But this is the crowd of disciples, his followers. They just saw this whole situation with the centurion the day before, so there's kind of this air of excitement. They're like, what's Jesus going to do? And these two crowds kind of bump into each other. And Jesus could have seen this as an inconvenience, just to kind of like walk around, like I got more important things to do. Probably people in that crowd would have looked at this woman and thought, well, it's just a poor widow, it's insignificant. Let's just move forward. And, she's probably going to become a burden to some of them, that she might be there sitting there begging one day. They might need to bring her food or whatever and try to take care of her. But Jesus doesn't look at her as an insignificant widow. He sees her as a person in need. And what he does to me amazes me. In verse 13, maybe out of all this verses in the story, these first few words jumped out of the page at me when I was studying. It says, when the Lord saw her, when he saw her, it's incredible that other people would have buzzed by and not paid any attention, but Jesus saw this desperate woman, this poor woman, and he actually, he saw her for who she was. He saw her need, and I want to encourage you this morning that he sees us. It doesn't matter how insignificant you may be or may think you are. It doesn't matter, maybe you think your problems are this small and everyone else, some people are like, well, I can't pray about that because God's got all these big things to worry about or whatever. But he sees your need. He sees my need, and he wants to help. He will stop. He will see us. It says he saw her and he had compassion on her, and he said to her, do not weep. There was, I was preparing this message a few days ago, and I was sitting at a Panera Bread that I don't usually go to, and the Lord brought to my mind a couple years ago. I was there with a friend, and we were walking out to the car, and there was a lady that worked at Panera sitting outside at the table that I was preparing this at. And we walked by it, and the Lord just prompted my heart to go back, and he's like, just go talk to her. And, sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't, but I was like, okay, Lord, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And I went back, and I said, you're going to probably think I'm crazy, but I felt like God just prompted my heart. I feel like he wanted me to come and talk to you. And she just broke down weeping, and she told me her whole story. I had a chance to minister to her, pray with her. And as we were walking away, she yelled, hey, and we turned around, and she said, I just want to say thank you. She said, I can't believe that you stopped for me. And I was thinking about this widow at the same time and thinking about that story. I mean, that's got to be the attitude, the testimony of that woman who's walking to bury her son, thinks that she's nothing. Her future is now lost in some ways. And all of a sudden, the Son of God who's walking the earth saw her, and he stopped for her because she was in need. And he had what she needed to make her free. It's just incredible. But he doesn't just see us, he has compassion. I love that there's so many miracles in the New Testament that say Jesus was moved with compassion when he did miracles. His compassion is not just pity or human emotion. It's something that has action attached to it. I've got friends that are unbelievers, and sometimes if you're going through something difficult, you're going to have a surgery or something, and they'll send like a message to you, hey, just thoughts are going your way or whatever. And I appreciate that because it's nice human sentiment, but when I'm getting ready to have surgery or whatever, I need people who know how to get a hold of God, who can pray. Like, I want the prayer warriors. Like, you can send all the thoughts you want, but that's not going to do much. And I appreciate it. I love them, whatever, it's great. But Jesus doesn't just send thoughts our way. He doesn't just say, well, I'm thinking of you, I feel bad for you in your sin and in your pain or whatever that thing is, you're in your need. His compassion moves him to act, and that's what he does for this woman. He's not just a shoulder for her to cry on and say, oh, I'm so sorry about your son, but look what he does in verse 14. I wish we had a video of this. This would be awesome. It says, he came and he touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said to him, young man, I say to you, arise. So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. Now, I don't know how to even get myself in the mind of what this mom's going through at this moment. Like, she's going through all this emotion. She's ready to bury her son. She's got all this stuff. She's walking through this whole process. And Jesus just shows up in her situation, and he just touches the coffin, and they're probably, like the funeral procession people are like, what in the world's going on? And he's like, young man, get up. And this boy who is dead rises up, and Jesus gives him back to the mom. And I was thinking about the mourners. They're probably like, are we still getting paid? Like the hired people or whatever. But Jesus crashed the funeral is what he did. There's actually a story about D.L. Moody when he was early in ministry, had to do a funeral, and he went to the scriptures to find out how Jesus would do a funeral, and he realized there was no opportunity because Jesus always crashed every funeral he went to. And that's what he does here. He crashes it, and I just can picture Jesus with this huge smile on his face, like presenting this, here, Mom, here's your son back, Can you just imagine Jesus in that moment watching this reuniting and seeing this woman's expression, and all the people, all these crowds of people are watching this thing. I mean, gosh, what I would have paid to be able to be there at that time. But her hopes that had been crushed, that were laying in that coffin, he now returned her hope and her future to her, and brings back that which was dead into life. In verse 16, it says, the fear came upon them all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. In this widow's story, we see Jesus. We don't even know, she didn't even ask for the miracle, which is incredible. Maybe she prayed. Possibly she cried out to the Lord for her son, but after he's dead, she's thinking, well, it's over with now. And Jesus comes crashing on her scene, filled with compassion, sees the need, meets her need by his love and power, and restores her hope for the future, all just in a few words. You say, what in the world do these two stories have anything to do with us? I think they have a whole lot to do with us, especially those of us walking through this program at this season. Because I see three things that stuck out to me about Jesus that I think were so important for me and are still important. The first thing we see is that I think Jesus responds to the cry of a desperate heart. In both of these stories, these are desperate situations. This isn't, God, I need I want to have a good day today, or I need a new car, or whatever. These are literally life and death situations. In the centurion's servant, he's on the brink of death, and in the widow's son, he's already passed from this life. And so these are desperate situations, but there's something about desperation that draws on the heart of God. There's something about the desperate heart that Jesus just can't help but get involved with, is what I see. God says in Psalm 50, verse 15, call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. Probably most of you in this room going through the program would see this as a day of trouble in some sort. You're walking through some difficult times. And God says, if you call on me in your day of trouble, I will deliver you. If we call on him, he will respond. That's the promise of his word. Psalm 34:6, the psalmist testifies, this poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. There's something that about the cry of a desperate heart that God won't shut off. It draws his attention. It draws his heart. And he uses that desperation to draw us to himself. I was talking to our recovery group a couple weeks ago about this, that all of us want to have an easy button God, like, God, I just have this issue, boom, we hit the button, he fixes it, it's done. I don't ever want to lust again, boom, and then he fixes it. And then, I want all these things respect, and we just hit the button and God just does it. But the problem with that is, as soon as all our problems were fixed, we wouldn't need God anymore. If he just did every little, sometimes he does incredible things, he can deliver us, he does all those things, but if he doesn't leave us in some kind of weakness, there's no need for him. And he uses our weakness, he uses all those things to draw us to himself. And the best thing you can do in this season of your life is to get desperate for God. To get desperate for him, to not lose sight of your need for him. It's okay to be desperate. We all come in here probably with different various levels of pride, but the proud person won't allow himself to get desperate because he thinks he's already got it figured out. It's all about me. It's all about my strength. I can make it through this. I can do this. And the Lord has to break that from us to get us to a place where we're like, God, I can't do this. If you could do this, you wouldn't be sitting here right now. If I could do this, I wouldn't have walked through this place 11 years ago. So we need to throw all that off and say, God, I have got to get desperate for you and allow you to move in my life. You say, well, how do I get desperate? And I'll give you the advice that my counselor, the first thing of homework assignment I remember getting was he just said, just begin to cry out to God. Just cry out to him. I said, what if I don't feel like I need him? Or he said, just do it anyways. Just do it mechanically. I don't know. We used to, in Teen Challenge, they used to say, fake it till you make it. I don't know that that's a great, philosophy or whatever, especially, but just do it anyways, even if you don't feel it, is what he told me. And I just, whatever. I had to meet him the next week and tell him what I did, so I had to do the assignment, so I'm going to do it and go back to him and say, hey, I tried this, it's not working. And I started doing it, and it started working. because I really had a deep need. I knew that I needed God, but I didn't know how to get it out of me. I didn't know how to make it whatever, bubble up or whatever. But by just simply telling the Lord throughout the day, I need you in this situation. God, I need you. I need you. And by doing that over and over, and I can tell you 11 years later, every day I'm praying that prayer. I still need God. I need him more probably now than I ever needed him before. But allow him to develop that cry in your heart. Allow him to get desperate. That's what you need in this season is desperation, and Jesus will respond to a desperate cry. The second thing I see about him is that Jesus comes near to the humble. The centurion was maybe from public perception not a humble man. Maybe they saw him as this big leader and he was very elevated, but in his own eyes he was certainly humble, and he felt himself unworthy, and Jesus responded to him. And then this widow, who is probably insignificant in the eyes of many in the world, this humble woman who doesn't even have a name, is not named in Scripture, and yet Jesus comes and he doesn't resist them, he doesn't turn them away, but he comes near. He draws near to those people that are humble. It's a principle we see throughout Scripture that God is drawn to humble people. In Psalm 138:6, it says, "Though the Lord is on high, yet he regards the lowly, but the proud he knows from afar." Isaiah 57:15 says, "For thus says the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and with him who has a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones." Those scriptures talk about this God. It's incredible. It's impossible to really get our minds wrapped around. The God who created everything. I was talking with someone yesterday about the billions of stars and galaxies and all this, this huge expanse. The one who created all of that and figured out how the human body would work and all that, had balanced everything out, all the stuff that he had to do. He cares about us, and he's willing to come and dwell among us and help us. That he says, even though I'm that big of a God, I'm that big, I dwell with the ones who are low to the ground. I dwell with those who are lowly of heart. And in these two stories, we get to see what that looks like for God to reach out and to give grace to the humble through these two different accounts. He responds to the humble with compassion and a willingness to help. And if you and I will humble ourselves, he will draw near to help us. When I came to Pure Life, I was filled with pride. I thought I knew better than everybody. I thought, what can another program teach me? I've been to Bible school. I've been a missionary. I had my whole, all the things that you fill out, all the criteria in your mind of why I thought I knew better than everyone else. And the Lord had to do a deep work in my life to bring me down. But it's the greatest thing that he's ever done for me. It was hard, it was difficult, and still he humbles me all the time. I have to walk in humility still, but if he had never done that, I would have been one of those that walked out of this program and went right back to my sin because I thought I knew better. And so humble yourself in this season. Humble yourself to your counselor. Humble yourself before the Lord. Just get past the idea that you know everything. If you knew everything, again, you wouldn't be here. Like, none of us knew everything coming here. And so our best got us to this place. And so maybe we should try something else and try God's best for a change. But it takes humility to humble ourselves and say, God, I don't have all the answers and I need you. But when you do that, when you take that step toward the Lord, he will take a step towards you. And then the third thing that I found in this story is that Jesus is both willing and able to meet the needs of people. He's both willing and he's able. The centurion is in this situation. He's going to lose a servant. We usually focus on the centurion, but the servant is here on his deathbed. He's going to lose his life. And Jesus shows that he's willing to not only meet the need, but he's willing to overstep cultural boundaries to help a Gentile, to help an enemy soldier, and to help him in his situation. But he's not only willing to help, but he's able to help the servant, and the servant receives new life. He receives healing and is able to continue to live. The widow had lost her only son, along with her future protection, and Jesus shows not only is he willing to help her by asserting himself into her situation, but he's able to raise her son from the dead, and he proved that by speaking to the boy and the boy coming back to life. And I was thinking about this. If Jesus was only willing but not able, it would be great. We'd say, wow, God has a really great heart, and he really loves people, and he really wishes he could do something, but there's no help, We would think he's a really nice person. If he was only able to do it and not willing to do it, That'd be really frustrating because we would know he's got the power to fix my situation. He's got the power to heal, but he's not going to do it because he's not willing to do it. But I'm so grateful that we serve a God who's both willing and able. Jesus, he has asserted himself, just like that widow. He got into her situation, maybe uninvited from the outside. She didn't say, Jesus, can you come here and do something? She's just in her grief. But Jesus came, he asserted himself into her situation. And I want to just declare to you, that's what he's done for you. And that's why you're sitting here this morning. He has asserted himself into your life. He has given you an off-ramp from all the craziness and all the chaos and all the sin and all the bondage and all the destruction. He's given you an off-ramp by bringing you here. And he's doing it because he's both willing and able to meet you at your need. I don't know if you can look at these stories and, the same Jesus that was able by his authority to speak a word and see someone healed who wasn't even in the room, and the same Jesus who was able to raise a young man from the dead, do you think that Jesus can't help you in your sexual sin? Do you think anything's too big for this God who's proven his power over sickness and death and a bunch of other ways and resurrected from the grave? Do you really think that he's like, well, I heal lepers and I heal the sick and I cast out devils and I raise the dead, but these guys with the pure life, that's like beyond my pay grade. I mean, like, why do we think that we're somehow too far gone for him? He's able to do the work that you need done. Whatever you came here for, he is able. I promise you, he is able, and he's shown it in a million ways throughout the scriptures and even in our lives. There's nothing too big for him, but it's not just that he's able to do it, but I just want to tell you that I believe he's willing, or he wouldn't have wasted his time bringing you here. There's a lot of seats here. There's a lot of men out there that need it, and this season, you're the group that he brought here to this place. I was thinking about the leper that came to Jesus in Matthew 8 and said this, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus, it says, he put out his hand, he touched the man, he said, I am willing, be cleansed. And the leper was cleansed. And I was just thinking as I was preparing that Jesus, if he was standing here today in the flesh, if he was sitting there right next to you, I really believe he would turn to you and look everyone in this room in the eyes and say, I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to set you free. I'm willing to restore your life, whatever that looks like. I'm willing to clean you up and heal past destruction and fix. I'm willing to do the work if you'll just allow me to do it. And you and I, through our desperate cries and for humbling ourselves and through faith in what he can do, we can pull on the heart of Jesus and we can see him move in our situations. That's all my testimony is that I just got desperate for God and I humbled myself as best I could, and I had faith that maybe he could do something. When I first came to the program, I had zero faith. I thought, there's no way God can do anything for me, and even if he could, he wouldn't. And the Lord had to slowly chip away at my lack of faith and my unbelief and say, it's not just that he's able, because I began to see other men getting free. And I heard the testimonies of staff, so then I started thinking, well, maybe he can do it, but he probably won't do it for me. Like, that's great for them, and I'm happy for them, but I'm the exception, I'm the one who went too far. I'm the one who was the biggest hypocrite, or whatever that thing in my head was. And the real changing point in my life here in the program, I talk about, the week that the Lord kind of came to me, but it was just me realizing and coming to grips with the fact he was willing. That he was saying to me, like, I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing. And when I finally saw his willingness, that gave me enough hope to continue to press on and to walk through the season. But I had to really come to that place of say, okay, God, are you really willing? Are you speaking this to me? Not the guy sitting next to me. And so I just wanted to share those three things, that if you can just get desperate for him and humble yourself and have faith, just a mustard seed of faith, a tiny little grip of faith. If you just think maybe God would do something, that's enough for God to work with to come into your situation and give you the breakthrough that you need. And as we were worshiping, I just had a picture, and I want to take some time, because we could talk about these things, but I want to actually put it into practice and spend just a few moments and just open up the opportunity for people just in your own time, in your own place, whether you're sitting in your seat, whether you want to come up front, but just take some time and cry out to him. Because you might be sitting here saying, I'm not really desperate. Well, what do? Well, you cry out to the Lord, say, make me desperate. I'm not desperate. My heart is hard. I don't think I'm ready to change. I don't know that I want this way of the Lord they're talking about. I still love the world. Well, bring that to him and all your mess and set it before him and say, God, please make me desperate for you instead of for all this other stuff. If you're walking in pride and you know that you're not humble and you're not trying to humble yourself, then bring that to the Lord. Say, I'm arrogant. I'm filled with pride. I think I know better than everybody. I'm a Pharisee. And just bring that to him, the brokenness and everything you have, and say, God, this is where I'm at, but can you humble me? I remember praying a prayer that began to change everything. I began to pray sincerely from my heart, God, do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes for you to get a hold of me, whatever it takes for you to humble me, just do that. And I had an open door to the Lord. I don't care how painful it is. I'm ready to change. I got to that place. Like, God, just whatever. If you have to crush me, if you have to take away everything from me and strip it away from me, do that kind of work in me if it's going to get me right with you. And if you don't have faith, you say, well, that centurion, I'm like, there's no way I have that kind of faith. Then just tell the Lord, I don't have faith to believe right now. I don't think I even think you can do it or you're willing to do it. But can you at least give me some faith? Can you let something come alive in me? And just in your own words, have those conversations with the Lord. And I felt like the Lord was saying that there's grace this morning for people to cry out to him. That maybe for some, this will be a breakthrough moment. Maybe you haven't been able to cry out. That this morning, there's grace here for you just to be able to have an honest conversation, let down all the pretenses, all that stuff, and just for a moment, push all that stuff away and just say, God, this is where I'm actually at, and this is what I need from you. That's all he wants. Just honesty and transparency. And I really believe that the Lord will respond to that. Maybe not immediately, maybe not a week from now, but that it starts something. There's a direction he begins to take you on. And it can change that, like you're heading this direction, but crying out to him, you begin to change. You won't even necessarily see it. But months from now, you'll look back and you'll say, wow, look what God has done in my life. Look what he's done inside of me. That's the kind of work he wants to do. And so I don't know if we can have, Nate, if you could strum, or we got keyboard or whatever. Can we have a little bit of music? So, okay. Just some music, that would be great. But I just want to open up, and like I said, you could do it from your seat. I'll close this in prayer. I'll come up and close the time or whatever. But can we just take a few moments for the Lord and just spend time with Jesus and just get honest and get real with him and let him minister to us?